Thank you everyone for coming out today. My name is Jeremy Johnson, and I will be presenting today on CSS corners, borders, and shadows. All my previous recordings went over 15 minutes, so this is my speed run to see how fast I can run through all this for you guys. So please keep up, and I will be presenting this physically through my Visual Studio Code and HTML browser so that everyone can see in real time the effects that these attributes have on our web pages. I hope that the visual display will help ingrain it in our minds and see how it's relevant for our own lives and for our own websites, especially in this class. So today I will be talking about borders and corners in the same section and shadows separately. The reason why I will be combining borders and corners is because corners are part of a border attribute. So let's go ahead and look at this area right here. I'm going to demonstrate all of these borders through the UL element. So these two areas will have borders applied to them. The first three attributes I want to talk about are border width, border color, and border style. I have some pretty normal values put in here. I'm going to just give it a normal value of 5 pixels. Save that, and let's see what that does. So as you can see, there's a black border around the UL element now. It's about 5 pixels wide, it's black, and it's solid. So pretty straightforward. However, I want to stress an important tip before we dig into borders, which is the trouble word. If you don't remember this, you will have trouble as you try and apply borders to your elements. The important letters of trouble are T, R, B, and L. These are important because we need to remember top, right, bottom, left. That is the order that we can apply values to our sides in a border. Let me demonstrate this. This becomes really important throughout the next several attributes. So let's look at border width as a very clear indicator. Let's say we want 5 pixels for our top, but we want 1 pixel for our right side, 5 pixels for our bottom, and 1 pixel for our left side, similar to our right. Let's see how that affects things. As you can see, it's in the order of top, right, bottom, left, and the top is 5 pixels wide, the right is 1 pixel, the bottom is 5 pixels, and the left is 1 pixel. So, as we order our values in the order of top, right, bottom, left, we can change the width of specific borders that we intend. This becomes really useful when designing certain elements that we design to look a certain way. We see this all the time in W3 schools, and we see this, for example, up in my header right here, where I've got a gray background and 1 border on the bottom. With border width, there's also an easier way to say it. So, as I showed earlier, you can assign 1 value and it will apply to all sides. You can assign 1 value to 4 different sides using the top, right, bottom, left method, the trouble method. There's a third way to assign a border width, and it is through 3 different terms. Sorry, I didn't mean to capitalize that. Medium, thin, and thick. Now let's just throw in another thin for the left side. Let's see what these look like on our page. So as you can see, we've got a medium, a thin, a thick, and a thin. So those are nice because they're just a very organic way of remembering our border widths. So I hope that helps you remember. good and easy ways to come up with border widths for your page. Border color is similar to all other border attributes we've used in the past. So you can use a name, and you can also use RGB values. However, what's important to note is that it also follows the top right, bottom left method. So I can say black, gray, green, and dark blue. Now when we save and show it on the page, we have black, gray, green, and dark blue borders. This is really nice because now we can have very specific, very tailored border widths and border colors. But what about styles? What if we want dots on our left side, dashes on our bottom, but solid on our top? Well, that is very possible and easy to do. We use the border style attribute, the third attribute we are going to talk about today. So let's use solid as our top, dashed as our right, dotted as our bottom, and double as our left. Let's see how that affects our element. As you can see, we've got a black, solid, thick border at the top, a thick gray dashed border on the right, a thick green dotted border at the bottom, and a thick dark blue double border on the left. I have listed the styles available for border style attribute. They're all pretty self-explanatory. The none, you may be interested in that one, that is a non-existent one. So for example, if I were to put that here, you would see no border at the top. And the other ones are fun to experiment with. I encourage everyone to try out these attributes, but we're not done with border yet. There is a very convenient section, a very convenient point, which is that we can specify exactly which side we want in only one letter rather than running through 4 different values. So previously, we either had to put in one value that applied to every side, or we put in 4 values, but if we only wanted one specific side, we had to specify none on the others, or 0 in the width, or white for the color, or our background color. One of those had to be true. But now, we can do something as simple as this. Border dot the side that you wish to put in, dash style. Let's see how that affects our page. As you can see, instead of having 4 lines, a full border, because the only rule is for the border left, we only have a border there. This would have been similar if we had done the shorthand, which is border. Let's see how that affects the page. This has easily become my favorite attribute as I've played around with it, because the border attribute lets you combine the first 3 attributes that we've talked about into one attribute. Similar to how the border side style lets you take a shortcut through naming the styles of each one and lets you have one style set up. The border attribute lets you name first a border width value, a border style value, and then a border color value. Let's see what it looks like in practice. Let's do thick, double dark blue. As you can see, that saved us 3 lines of code and only 3 values to get this. That looks pretty good for very little effort. Another shortcut is that, similar to how we had to write 3 lines of code to have a border on our left side that had double lines, it was thick, and it was dark blue. One simple shortcut is to say border left. Now we can have exactly what we had earlier. This also works for top, right, or bottom. Suddenly we have what we had earlier, but also in one line of code. Now I need to explain border radius. Let's make this back to one border so that we can see it across the whole element. To add corners, we use the border radius element. The border radius element is very interesting because it lets you change the corners of your elements. Let's try 15 pixels. As you can see, we've got rounded corners on our elements. This is an easy way to make, say, an article on your website stand out. And as we discuss shadows later, that will affect it even more. One thing I want to run through really quickly is that, similar to the top right, bottom left method, putting in multiple values changes things. If I were to put in 2 values, we'd be looking at different corners on 2 halves of our thing. We'd be looking at corners that are like that on the top left and the bottom right, and on the top right and the bottom left. Let's see it in action. You can see we got changes in our top right and bottom left. If we add a third value, changes things even further, because now the first one only applies to the top left, the second one applies to the top right and bottom left, and the third one applies to the bottom right. So we should see a change only in that corner. Let's try 35 pixels. Let me see, that changed only that corner. If we had a fourth one, it's easier to predict as it follows the treble method. Let's try this with 5 pixels. You can see the left corner stuck out again. Okay, let's go to text shadow and box shadow. So let's look at shadows as it comes to this lettering right here. Right now we've got a very simple shadow that is 1 pixel, light gray. Text shadows and box shadows are identical in how they are formatted, except text shadows applies to type and box shadow applies to elements. The first value I have here is the horizontal value. The second value is the vertical value. It's how much it is offset from the type. You don't need a color, however you can specify the color as a third value. Let's do one. Let's make it a little bit more obvious by having the color of the text be green and the shadow being black. Let's see that in action. Okay, let's offset the vertical by 5 pixels so we can clearly see how the vertical affects it. So as you can see, it's moved over quite significantly. We don't like that. So let's move it back to 2 pixels. However, there is a third value that can go in between the horizontal vertical value and the color, which is the blur value. Let's put it at 3 pixels. And we can actually get rid of the black because that's the default. So let's see how that affects it. As you can see, it's blurred. Let's try something a little different. Let's try putting a border, a neon, making it look neon behind the lettering. Of course, it's very different neon because it's black. But we could try this with yellow, maybe. So with the 0 pixels here, we set it that it's offset not at all, but it has a very high blur value, which means the color spills out around the lettering. Another interesting fact is that we can have multiple borders. So we could do 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 1 pixel, black, and we'd be looking at a second shadow on that same type. In fact, that's exactly how people put borders around text. They would set the color here to something like white and have 4 different text shadows. So 4 formats similar to this with commas. And then one of these values would be either -1, the other one would be 0, the other one would be 1, 0. The third one would be 0, -1, and then 0, 1. So it makes 4 shadows that are perfectly shaped around the perimeter of the type. Thank you everyone for coming here today. That was CSS corners, borders, and shadows.